Please don't die. Single dad saves billionaire in crash. Then vanishes without a trace. The snow was falling so heavily that night that it erased the road, the sky, and every direction in between, until the crash tore through the silence like a scream that refused to die. The sound echoed across the empty highway, metal crushing against metal, glass shattering into 1,000 helpless pieces. Inside the wrecked car, a woman sat slumped in the passenger seat, her breath shallow, her vision fading, a thin line of blood tracing down her temple. And outside, through the blizzard, a man came running, desperate, terrified, and already too late to turn back. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's destiny, take a moment right now to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, do you believe in second chances? He didn't think. He didn't hesitate, he only ran. His name was Daniel Carter, a single father who had learned the hard way that life doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. Just a few hours earlier, he had been driving home after a long shift, his mind heavy with bills, responsibilities, and the quiet worry that never left him, the kind that came from raising a child alone. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was waiting for him at home, probably asleep on the couch again, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Daniel had promised her he'd be back early that night, but life had other plans. When he saw the wreck, his heart dropped. The car had spun off the road, half buried in snow, its front crushed beyond recognition. The headlights flickered weakly, like they were fighting to stay alive. And for a brief second, Daniel froze, not because he didn't care, but because he understood exactly how fragile moments like these were. Then he moved. He forced the door open with everything he had, his hands shaking from the cold and adrenaline. Inside, he found her, elegant even in chaos, wrapped in a now-torn coat, her face pale but striking, her breathing uneven. He didn't know who she was, didn't recognize her as someone powerful or important. In that moment, she was just a human being slipping away, and he wasn't going to let that happen. He pulled her out carefully, ignoring the pain as shards of glass cut into his hands. The snow bit into his skin, but he barely felt it. All he could hear was his own voice, low and desperate, repeating the same words over and over again, "Please don't die." He wrapped her in a thermal blanket from his car, pressing it around her tightly, trying to keep whatever warmth remained from escaping. Her head leaned against his shoulder, her body weak and unresponsive. For a terrifying moment, he thought she had stopped breathing. But then, barely a breath, Daniel acted fast. His phone had no signal, the storm too strong, the road too isolated. There was no one else coming, no help, no backup, just him, so he did the only thing he could. He carried her step by step through the snow against the wind that felt like it wanted to push him back into failure. He moved forward. His arms burned, his legs trembled, but he didn't stop. He thought of Lily. He thought of how he would feel if someone left her behind in a moment like this. And that thought alone was enough to keep him going. After what felt like an eternity, he reached a small roadside shelter, a forgotten maintenance cabin used during winters. It wasn't much, but it had walls, a door, and protection from the storm. He laid her down gently, checked her pulse again, and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She was still alive. Inside that dim, freezing cabin, Daniel did everything he could. He cleaned the wound on her head as best as he could with what little he had. He used his jacket, his own warmth, anything to keep her stable. Time blurred into hours. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only silence and the fragile rhythm of her breathing. At some point, exhaustion took over him too, but he didn't sleep. He stayed awake, watching her, making sure she didn't slip away. Because somehow, without knowing her name or her story, she had become important. Not because of who she was, but because of what she represented. A life worth saving. By morning, the storm had weakened. Rescue teams finally reached the highway, tracing the crash reports that had come in too late the night before. When they found the shelter, they found her alive. But Daniel was gone. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't leave a note. He didn't tell anyone his name. He just disappeared. The woman he saved was not just anyone. Her name was Victoria Hale, a billionaire, a name known in boardrooms, headlines, and industries across the world. A woman admired for her strength, feared for her decisions, and envied for her success. But none of that mattered when she woke up in the hospital, because the first thing she asked was not about her company, her money, or her future. It was about the man who saved her life. No one had answers. The reports said she had been found alone. The rescue team never saw him. There were no witnesses, no cameras, no clues, except for one thing, a worn-out thermal blanket that didn't belong to her. Victoria held onto that detail like it was a lifeline. Weeks passed, but she couldn't move on. The memory of that night haunted her, not in fear but in gratitude. She remembered fragments. A a voice, a pair of trembling hands trying to save her, a presence that refused to let her go, and she needed to find him. For the first time in years, Victoria put everything on hold. Meetings were cancelled, deals were delayed. Her team was confused, her investors restless, but she didn't care because somewhere out there was a man who had nothing, yet gave everything. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his life as if nothing had happened. He never spoke about that night. Not to anyone, not even to Lily. To him, it wasn't a story worth telling. It was simply what needed to be done. But life didn't suddenly become easier. If anything, it grew harder. His job barely covered their expenses. Some nights he skipped meals so Lily could eat better. The stress weighed on him, but he carried it quietly like he always did. Yet something had changed. There was a strange calm inside him, a quiet understanding that even in the darkest moments, he had done something right. And that was enough. Months later, Victoria's search led her nowhere, until one small detail changed everything. A mechanic reported a man who had come in with deep cuts on his hands around the time of the storm. He had refused proper treatment, paid in cash, and left quickly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The search narrowed. The clues aligned. And finally, one ordinary afternoon, Victoria stood outside a small, worn-down house in a quiet neighborhood. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from something deeper. She knocked. When Daniel opened the door, neither of them spoke for a moment. Time seemed to pause. He recognized her instantly. Not as a billionaire, but as the woman he had carried through the storm. And she saw him not as a stranger, but as the reason she was still alive. There were no dramatic words, no grand gestures, just silence filled with understanding. From that moment on, both their lives began to change, not overnight, not magically, but slowly. Victoria didn't try to repay him with money. She understood that what he had done couldn't be bought. Instead, she offered something different: opportunities, support, a chance for stability. And Daniel, hesitant at first, allowed himself to accept help, not as charity but as a step forward. For Lily, everything changed the most. She finally saw her father smile more. Years later,